Hey everybody, so as we start our study of the world and geography and cultures, we kind of got to figure out what culture actually is. And so we start this first little unit. We're going to try and build a base that we're going to use to study the rest of our different parts of the world all year long, or I should say all trimester long. And so we're going to start with a short little video about the elements of culture. We're going to use this as in a little project in class. Please make sure you watch it, take some good notes so we can use it and apply it to what we're talking about later on. So think about your culture, what you live, and what you do. And we do activities within class as well. And I want you to really think about what kind of things you experience. And there'll be some questions going along in this video to ask you those very questions. Now, culture is very simply the attitudes and knowledge behaviors passed down by members of a group. There's certain things that every culture that exists in the world has. Those ideas and things are passed down from generation to generation and kind of stay the same that way. We really learn a lot of behavior and pass down the next generation. Some of the beliefs we have in the United States started a long, long time ago in the 1700s, 1600s, and been passed down through today. Now, in some parts of the world, we see certain cultural beliefs that are applied to people that live in a certain area, and we call those ethnic groups then. And so maybe you have a group of people living in Albania or Greeks who have maybe a Muslim background and more Middle Eastern or Arab traditions. That might be an ethnic group living within a country. Or if you have people who are Greek, you're a Greek ethnicity, or you have Greek language and Greek traditions and those kind of things. And so when you think about people who have certain traditions and beliefs, that's an ethnic group versus, say, like a race, if that makes sense, okay? And so that's why kind of people kind of mix up race and ethnic group. And ethnic group is about the beliefs that people have versus like some kind of physical characteristic that people might have instead. And so culture really means it's about the things that are on the inside for people, what they believe and what they do. And so there's certain elements of culture when she has list down and think of examples of these as we go through them. That's something we'll be doing here in class. And the first couple of things that cultures have are very, very unique: foods and shelters. And even within the United States and regions of the United States, you'll think about certain types of houses and certain types of places that people live in. Because of where culture lives and what they think is important, they have very different types of houses that they live in. You know, a city with not a lot of space, they value that space. We have high rises to maximize that. This picture here are the favelas in Brazil, outside of Rio de Janeiro, where the culture, values, survival at this point and building houses wherever they can. You may have bigger house or a smaller house, basements or no basements, all kind of built around what you feel is important for those places. Same thing for food too. You think about what is kind of the food that we kind of think of in quote unquote American culture or Chinese culture, or Japanese culture, what it might be, and it's really impact on where cultures live, what they have available to them. Here in the United States, with a lot of land we have, beef was very, very available, which we now become a big part of our diet. Whereas in some cultures, because of their beliefs or where they live, beef is very, very rare. It's not something that people eat very, very often. Some places are strictly vegetarian because they have. And certain places would be like, oh my God, you eat that. It was brought up in class that there are certain cultures where traditionally dog has been eaten in the past. Well, we were looking at, oh my gosh, dogs are pets, but for them it could be food. And same thing here. In some cultures, cows are pets, not food. And so every culture has their own foods that they feel are kind of uniquely theirs that way. Cultures also have religion. And religion is a big part because religion kind of brings answers to the unanswerable, where we came from, where we go, why things happen, all that kind of stuff. And typically we can divide the religions of the world into two groups: either monotheistic, meaning one god or one supernatural being, or polytheistic, where there's many gods or supernatural beings that exist in the world. Thinking about Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all monotheistic religions where there's one god or supreme being. Whereas some religions, like some of the old animist religions, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Egypt, Hinduism, are considered polytheistic, where there are many, many gods that exist. And as cultures have these beliefs become very important to them, it's created a lot of conflict throughout history as to, who's actually right. It also inspires our art, because we notice that a lot of artwork around the world is very religious inspired, right? Think about ancient Egypt. A lot of their artwork was with their gods, those kind of things. Statues in ancient Greece. If you go to India, a lot of Hindu statues for the Hindu gods, or Buddhas for those who believe in Buddhism. Even in Christianity, a lot of paintings and statues that relate to religion. So a lot of times our art is shown as being a religious thing as well. Now, taking a big group of people in a culture, we can break them down. And there's two ways we kind of break down how we organize and group people. And the easiest one is by family, and a question of kind of who lives in a house. That's what we describe family as a lot of times. And so some people can kind of say what family is or where it is, or if the idea of family is changing a little bit. But for our purposes, we have two different views of family. We have the nuclear family or the extended family. So nuclear family means that there is one generation living in a household. A couple, or parents and children. That is like one generation or one group living in a household. A lot of times we'll find this in industrialized countries like the United States and Western Europe, whereas extended family, where you have several generations, might be grandparents and parents and kids and grandkids and aunts and uncles and different levels of that group living within one household. That's more what's seen in the agrarian cultures or the farming cultures of the world, where more work is needed a lot of times to survive. Now, family organization can also be divided up by how names and goods and properties pass down. A lot of times we see two different groups, either patriarchal or matriarchal families, where patriarchal means that males have more authority, as well as name and products and goods are passed down through the male side of the family. Whereas some cultures have a matriarchal system, where the female members of the family are more important, usually have the positions of authority, and then also name and property and goods are passed down through the female side of the family as well. And so these are two different groups that kind of split or kind of divide family organization. Every culture has things that are very important to them and their important beliefs, and so we have ways of protecting that as well. And so cultures will develop their own kind of security, if you will, to kind of protect their culture, protect what's important to them. You think about our culture being important and not having outside invaders to stop or take over. That's why we have military, right? Military is there to protect our culture from outside influences or from being taken over by somebody who is different than us in a lot of times. We also have police to kind of make sure that people within our culture abide by the rules of our culture. If we think that safety or property and life are really important to our culture, we're going to have cops there to protect us from that, from people taking those things away from us. And so that's kind of why we have that culture. It's not like a purge situation where anything goes, right? We have people there to make sure that everyone kind of plays by the rules we have. We also, if your possessions are important, say, for example, in our culture, possessions and your property is very, very important. Well, that's why we have things like publicly supported fire departments to protect your property, so that fires don't ravage around and destroy the stuff we've worked hard to get. And so every group also has security and protection, make sure they keep everything nice and neat as well. Now, one of the most fundamental things we see in any culture is language, and language allows communication and the sharing and the spread of a culture, and for culture to be passed down from level to level. Now, language can be seen in two different ways. Either the oral language like you're hearing right now, or the written language that you're reading. Also in other terms of like body communication, those kind of things. And I understand, we think about our culture here, we have the English language, but people speak a lot of different languages in our culture. And so not all cultures have a written language. You go far, far back to say Native American cultures in the United States, a lot of Native American tribes did not have a written language. And so, all their stories were passed on from generation to generation by telling stories and telling legends, and passed on orally versus through a book. Now, within languages, sometimes there is a difference in different areas. Now, the English language is spoken all around the world, but England English versus American English versus, say, English in India or Australia are very different. Those are called dialects, okay? And speech patterns around the world are different based on where they are, related to the class or the regions or the culture where that language exists. Even within a country, there can be dialects that develop, and the slang, if you will, or they call it vernacular, is very different. What we say in Wisconsin could be very different than, say, in Texas or out east or out in the western part of the United States as well. People always said, oh, we know you're from Wisconsin based on how you talk or the words you use. It'd be as simple as, is it a water fountain or a bubbler? Is a carbonated beverage a soda, a pop, or a Coke? And those are kind of the big things that people look at in terms of dialect and how you label things in some cases. A lot of times languages are also related. English is a little weird because English comes from a lot of different languages. But if you look at languages like German, there are a whole bunch of Germanic languages all kind of are very similar, almost like cousins. There are Slavic languages like Russian and Czech. And those languages that are very, very common and very similar as well and are related and kind of that same parent language. The most famous by far, the ones we study here in the United States, are called the Romance language or Latin languages. So languages like French and Spanish are related to ancient Latin. And so if you know Latin, it's pretty easy to pick up on French and Spanish. Even if you know one, French or Spanish, it's pretty easy to pick up on the other one because there are a lot of similarities in some of the words or some of the grammar or some of the rules that exist in those languages that way. And so those are language families, and often you'll find them in certain areas. Think about who speaks Spanish, Italian, and French. Well, look, that's all in Western Europe. They're all kind of one little group. The Germanic languages, all kind of around Germany, right? You have the Slavic languages, Eastern Europe, and Russia. And so they kind of cluster around certain areas as well in terms of language families. Now, a lot of times cultures also have a preferred form of government, a way to make sure that the people's needs are met, and whatever these might be. The needs could be organization, it could be safety, it could be a lot of stuff. But that's why we have a government, to make sure that there are rules and laws in place to protect the culture and make sure that it's important that things are protected and taken care of. We also have social classes, and so social classes are simply how we rank each other in our culture. And so every culture ranks things differently. It could be on money, or it could be on possessions, could be on your occupation or your education. And everyone's a little bit different. A lot of times in the United States, think about our classes being upper, middle, and lower, and then all points in between, where it's based upon money. In some places, certain cultures base it more upon hierarchy or name. If you go back to like ancient medieval Europe, where your name and nobility meant everything, or in some cultures it's gender, whereas men or women are seen as higher ranking because of their gender. And so those are how social classes work. Now, every culture has something called social mobility. Either you have it or you don't, to some degree, and that's the question of, can you move between social classes? So here in the United States, for example, if you go to college, get a different job, earn a bunch of money, those kind of things, you could jump from lower to middle or upper class by working and by moving up and down on that spectrum of classes. Whereas in some other cultures, say let's go to ancient India, where the caste system was in place, well, once you're born into a group, you are stuck there. And so people argue if there's social mobility in certain cultures or not, that chance to move from level to level. Art and literature, also a big part of a culture, and art's just how a culture expresses itself and shows what it is proud of in that culture. And so art does a lot more than just paintings or drawings and sculpture. It's also music. It's also writing. It's poetry. It's all those kind of things. I like to give a lot of examples here in terms of modern day music. Hip hop and rap music started up as explaining and showing off and bringing emphasis to the urban culture of the United States in the 80s and 90s and the problems that are happening in urban cities. Whereas, say, like country music talks about a lot of the values that are important to the rural parts of the United States. And so you see culture being embedded within different arts and literatures that happen. Now, education is also very important. Every culture puts different values on education and where people are educated. And that's how they pass on their culture and what they feel is really important, what knowledge you have to have, what values you're supposed to have, what traditions you're supposed to do, right? We have both formally in school and informally at home. So maybe at home, you might learn morals, like how you're supposed to act, how you're supposed to behave, those types of things you may learn at home. You may learn some traditions as well, like You might learn about, sharing or about patriotism, whatever it might be. Whereas here at school, you might learn some of the knowledge and things you need to participate in our society, like government and how government works and voting and those kind of things. Different cultures teach different things in different ways. In some places, that informal education from your parents is honestly more important than the formal education at school, and sometimes vice versa, where the parents take a very hands-off approach and more focus is put on what kids do in school. Trying to finish off for guys, and one big part we see in culture are customs and traditions. Essentially, these rules of behavior are things you are supposed to do, and a lot of times people will enforce these on their own, kind of like how you greet people or how you meet people. And if you don't do it right, they kind of look at you funny and be like, what's wrong with this person? You know? So if you celebrate certain things, or you act a certain way, or you do something a certain way, and if you don't do them, they're kind of like, almost like peer pressure and just kind of conforming to what the culture expects out of you, So maybe, your tradition is you work hard and go to college and get a job, or you work hard and get a job and those kind of things, or you're supposed to buy a house, and kind of how things are supposed to be done. Even little things like how you act and behave. So it could be like, not burping or farting in public. And if you do that, people are like, oh, what's wrong with that person? And that's kind of what these customs, traditions come down to. It could also be things like holidays. It could be things like, how you celebrate certain deals. And if you do a little differently, people might kind of question that, because this is kind of where you form into that more traditional sense. Now, when you have a group of people in an area that follow a very similar culture, you create what's called a society. And society has expectations, how things are done, that things are done a certain way, and it polices itself. So if you step outside the rules of society, somebody's going to come and rein you back and be like, hey, you got to act a certain way, all right? And make sure that you do things the right way. They may call you out or kind of try to force you, encourage you to do things the way it's quote-unquote supposed to be. Now, cultures do change over time. We've noticed our cultures have been changing a lot. My own generation, I've seen things change in the last 20 years. That is insane. Going from having every single class being paper and pencil and lecture to having classes be online. Or thinking that China is so far away, and now I can literally log on to my computer and see China and talk to somebody in China if I want to. And so as we see culture change, because things spread and ideas spread and beliefs spread. And so technology allows us to share images and share ideas and share beliefs, whatever it might be, and share those behaviors and art and innovations to all parts of the world. And that's called cultural diffusion, when one place kind of spreads culture and it goes to other areas. You can think about, English being a language and spreading all over the world. And so innovation kind of helps take all these new things and meet these new needs, like, like YouTube sharing information or iPod sharing music, wherever it might be. And a lot of times you have a cultural hearth that's kind of like where all these ideas come from. And throughout history, different places have been a cultural hearth. At one point, it was Great Britain. At one point now, it's the United States. Maybe in the future, it's going to be India or China. They're going to be spreading more of their cultural ideas, and technological innovations will come from one place and go elsewhere. Now, when society changes, it goes through something called acculturation, where it's actually changing and adopting different cultural elements. Kind of like, how cell phones have changed America, that now you have, I see 80 and 90-year-olds with smartphones who are texting and Snapchatting. I don't use Snapchat, and yet my mother does. It's really weird, you know what I mean? And seeing how much people change and being like, my mom uses Snapchat. This is weird. You know what I mean? And it just shows how fast cultures may have changed, where, a couple years ago, she may have still been using a rotary dial phone, okay? And that's how quickly we see things change. We're going to stop there, guys, on our culture stuff. And thank you for watching and taking some notes. We're going to do some activities with this in class. I bid you all a great day. Thank you very much.